Most of the cost of framing comes from the labor involved. You, as an artist, are used to labor and can do a lot of it yourself. The presentation and storage of your work is important, so we are going to go over some basics on framing, storage, and other presentation issues. First up, let's spend lots of money. Pretty much anything that you would need for putting art on a wall or in front of an audience in some other way is going to be sold by United Manufacturing Supplies. They are the wholesaler that sends things like D-rings and picture hooks to your local frame shop. Gaylord Archival sells storage supplies to keep your art safe while you're waiting for someone to hang it in a museum. Dick Blick is a major art supply retailer on the internet. They also sell a lot of framing supplies, many of which are specifically designed for do-it-yourself artists. In Fort Collins, probably your best resource for getting something framed or picking up materials quickly is Colorado Frames. They're north of Old Town on Blue Spruce Road. They mill their own frames and are good at working with artists on a budget. The first and most basic thing that you want to do as an artist who needs to get something framed is try to avoid getting something framed. If you are a painter, a little bit of work at the beginning to address the presentation issues of the side of the stretcher will save you hundreds in avoided framing costs. It's perfectly acceptable in contemporary art to display works on paper unframed. And if you have to buy a frame, try to buy something simple that will work with almost any style. The reason the go-to frame in contemporary art is a simple rectilinear profile in either natural wood or black is not just because we're snooty elitists. It's also because it matches pretty much anything. If you can work with a few standard sizes of pre-made frames, your life will be so much easier. Even if you aren't making work that is precisely 16 by 20, as long as you have roughly the same margins on the top, the left, and the right, you can have a lot of extra white space at the bottom. So even if your piece doesn't perfectly fit your frame, you could probably still make it look good. Most of the cost of custom framing is due to the labor. If you can work with standard sizes, or if you can do a lot of the labor yourself, you'll save a ton of money. Which means that you need to know the basics of what you have to include in your frame. You need a rectangle, possibly made out of wood or even metal. Metal sectional frames have the reputation for being less expensive, but that isn't always the case. Price them out and see what actually is. For a lot of artists, wooden frames are both more durable and easier to work with. You're going to need some sort of glazing, and you probably want to go ahead and spend a little bit extra up front to get plexiglass. It's so much lighter and less prone to shattering that if there's any chance you're going to ship a frame, you want plexi. You need a spacer of some kind to keep the art from touching the plexi, especially if your work is charcoal or pastel, as the static that can build up on plexi can literally pull the art off of your paper. You want some sort of backing board. In this diagram, they're telling you to get 4-ply rag backing, and a 4-ply rag mat is the standard if you're going to mat. It is both easier to change things out and a lot cheaper if you just float your art on the backing board, so you can skip straight to getting acid-free foam core and ignore the mat board entirely. Because this frame is so deep, they're recommending a strainer, but that isn't necessary. And you can safely ignore almost all of these measurements. The website I stole this from was just trying to be really detailed. So as I mentioned, you don't want the art to touch the glass, but matting is expensive. You can build your own shadow box frame by cutting strips of acid-free foam core and gluing them to the sides of the frame after you've put the glass in. Another option is a product called Frame Space, rectilinear plastic tubes that usually come in 6-foot lengths and are either 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch with an adhesive side for you to stick to either the frame or the plexiglass. They come in white, black, clear, and a sort of tinted gray, whatever is going to match your frame best. It should be hidden by the rabbet of the frame. They're either solid or hollow plastic and are easily cut with wire cutters. You need some way to mount your work to your backing. If you get a sheet of acid-free foam core, you still need to attach the art to it somehow. If you are matting over, getting a window cut in a piece of mat board so that it hides the edges of your artwork, then you want to use framers corners or photo corners, little plastic corners that will stick to your mat board and have a pocket for your artwork to slide into, and allow you to switch out your art with very little damage to the framing. If you're skipping the mat board, you need to float your art. You can either get linen mounting tape, as seen at the bottom of this photo, or Japanese hinging tape, made with a mulberry or rice paper. It's really thin but very strong, and will have a water-activated adhesive on there. You can use a sponge, or just lick it. Some of them taste terrible, like corn nuts, and others taste worse. If your art is going to show without any mat board, then you'll need to make hinges. The simplest way is to fold the piece of tape in half and slide it under the artwork with either tweezers or a hemostat like shown here. While you're waiting for your linen tape or paper tape to set, you'll need to weight it down. Ask your local framer if they're willing to cut down some of the scraps of glass that they have left over from other projects. Layer it up with mat board and tape, and you've got a nice dense weight. If you want to be fancy, or you're going to be doing a lot of framing, go ahead and invest in a point driver. This Fletcher flexible point driver will shoot in little black metal tabs that you can bend back whenever you need to change out your artwork. If you don't want to spend the roughly $100 it's going to cost you to get a Fletcher, then go to the hardware store and ask them to give you some glazing points. You can see the metal flange. Use a screwdriver or putty knife to push the pokey part into the side of your frame and hold the artwork in. Whether you're framing or not, you need a way to hang the art on the wall. Galleries despise sawtooth hangers. Screw eyes work, but are not as secure as D-rings, also known as strap hangers or mirror hangers. They'll come in a variety of sizes that can support different amounts of weight, and will allow you to use one or multiple screws to attach it to the artwork, depending on how heavy the piece is. Buying these in bulk would absolutely be worth the investment. If you don't already have one, get an awl. You can use it to start a hole for your screws. Hopefully you have a tape measure already. If not, get one. Use it to measure how far down you want your hooks. Generally, you want it to be 1/3 of the way down on the back of the piece. You don't have to worry about fractions. You do need to be consistent with where you put the hardware. I usually line the top of the D-ring up with the mark 1/3 of the way down. A spool with yards of wire is another good investment. Pick a reasonably heavy weight and use it on everything. If you ever need to wire an exceptionally heavy piece, cut a piece about 2.5 times longer than you think it needs to be, crimp it in the middle, and secure it to a D-ring. Then put the 2 loose ends in an electric drill and turn it on for a few seconds. It will braid the wire together, and now it's twice as strong.